a subject with gunshot to the head.
Mass murder at a U.S. airport.
It was mass chaos.
Everybody was running.
A gunman opens fire in Fort Lauderdale, sending travelers running for their lives. More than a dozen have been shot.
5 people have succumbed to their wounds.
A suspect, an arriving passenger, is in custody and has exposed yet another hole in airport security. Also tonight, U.S. intelligence tells President-elect Trump Russian hackers worked on Putin's orders to help Trump win the presidency.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
This is our Western edition. The year begins with another mass shooting in America. The scene this time, a busy airport in South Florida. Without saying a word, a gunman opened fire earlier today at a baggage claim area at Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport. 13 people were hit. At least 5 of them have died. A suspect surrendered. He's identified now as 26-year-old Esteban Santiago, a former Army National Guardsman. He had flown to Fort Lauderdale on Delta Airlines from Alaska via Minneapolis. A local official says he removed the weapon from a case that he had checked. Federal sources tell us that 2 months ago, Santiago walked into an Alaska FBI office, and the agents there were so concerned about what he was saying, they sent him to a mental hospital. David Begnaud is in Fort Lauderdale and begins our coverage.
Shot fire at these deputies downstairs.
This cell phone video captures the moments after shots rang out at the baggage claim area in Terminal Number 2 of the Fort Lauderdale International Airport. A lone gunman opened fire on passengers, leaving 5 people dead and 8 injured.
Paramedics, lower level inside. We have a subject with gunshot to the head.
Some of the wounded found shelter outside while they waited for help. Hundreds more ran for safety onto the tarmac and airport roads, taking shelter near cars and up against buildings.
Everybody took off, and they said
a shooter.
Eyewitness Mark Leo was 10 feet away from the gunman.
He, like I say, just came into the door, did not yell, did not scream, just started shooting. We thought at first it was firecrackers. Then we realized it was gunshots, and by that time people were yelling and screaming and frantically trying to get out of any door that they could, or hide under chairs, hide behind their luggage, or anything else to get out of the line of fire.
I heard a lady yell for help, and then I just saw people running, and I just ran.
The shooter has been identified as 26-year-old Esteban Santiago from Anchorage, Alaska. According to officials, he was carrying a military ID. Eyewitnesses say the gunman ran out of ammunition and laid down when the police came and arrested him. One Broward County official is reported as saying the gunman was a passenger on an incoming flight. He retrieved his luggage at the baggage claim, walked into the airport restroom, loaded the gun, and then opened fire. Fort Lauderdale Sheriff Scott Israel.
We have the shooter in custody. He's unharmed. No law enforcement fired any shots. The subject is being interviewed by a team of FBI agents and Broward Sheriff's Office homicide detectives.
About an hour after the initial shooting, there were reports of more gunfire. Police moved in and people took off running yet again. But those reports were unfounded. There was also a bag found near a set of railroad tracks that was detonated. But Scott, we're told that bag is not connected to the gunman. And if it looks really quiet behind me at the airport, that is because the airspace is closed. No flights in or out of Fort Lauderdale right now.
And the full details on all of this overnight on CBS This Morning tomorrow. David Begnaud, thanks very much. Josh Elliott has late-breaking information about the suspect's background. Josh, what have you learned?
Scott, here's what we know. Investigators say that Esteban Santiago has no known connection to terrorism and that the 26-year-old New Jersey native got into an argument on one leg of his travel from Alaska to Florida. The motive remains under investigation. CBS News has also learned that 2 months ago, as you mentioned, Santiago walked into an FBI office in Anchorage, Alaska, claiming that his mind was being controlled by the CIA and the U.S. government and that he was being forced to watch ISIS videos. Anchorage police, in a follow-up to that FBI encounter, later sent Santiago to a hospital for psychiatric evaluation. Santiago also has a long military history. He deployed to Iraq in 2010 and was a member of the Alaska Army National Guard, Scott, until August of last year, when he was discharged for unsatisfactory performance.
Josh Elliott covering the story all afternoon. Josh, thank you very much. We spoke earlier today with a witness to the shooting, Mike Starobinski. He and his family were returning from a cruise.
We were sitting by the door. My kids were on the phone, just buying the time. And next thing I hear is popping noise. And somebody said, shots fired, shots fired. I grabbed the kids, ran out of it. My wife and my father-in-law were sitting outside. I gave the kids to my wife, who passed into my father-in-law, who went to Terminal 3, away from all this. And then we looked down where a man was bleeding with a woman right next to him, and she was just saying help. And she was bleeding. His face was turning pale. I'm just looking on how much blood he's lost. It's crazy.
There was nothing to stop the shooter from doing what he did. Our transportation correspondent, Chris Van Cleve, has the latest on gaps in airport security 15 years after 9/11.
Investigators believe the gun used in the baggage claim shooting was checked as luggage, something the TSA allows but requires the gun to be unloaded and locked in a case. It and ammunition must be disclosed to the airline prior to checking. Since 9/11, airports have seen a dramatic increase in security, but many parts of the terminals, like check-in and baggage claim, are outside the secured area and remain vulnerable soft targets. Ron Hosko is a former assistant director of the FBI.
One of the great challenges of a soft target is it's like squeezing a balloon. And where I tighten up my security in one place, the balloon expands somewhere else and presents itself as another soft target.
And he says securing areas like baggage claim in every airport would be a multi-billion-dollar investment.
We have to put it in that broader perspective. You're more likely to die in a car accident on your way home than to be in a terrorist strike at a U.S. airport.
Immediately after the shooting, airports across the country increased security. That includes airports in the New York City area, Miami, and Los Angeles. Scott, the LAX police chief, said they're going to look at lessons learned from Fort Lauderdale to see what kind of changes they can make in LA to make the airports safer.
And we're told during the shooting, some passengers were told that the safest place to be was on their airplane, and they stayed on the planes for hours. Chris Van Cleve for us tonight. Chris, thank you. In another major story tonight, U.S. intelligence has concluded that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered his military to help Donald Trump win the election. Today, the Director of National Intelligence took the unusual step of releasing an unclassified version of an investigation that details computer hacking, propaganda, and fake news articles. President-elect Trump was briefed on the classified report today, but he concluded that the hacking of sensitive Democratic Party files had no effect on the election. Homeland Security correspondent Jeff Pegues is following this.
The 25-page report states directly that Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. It started as a grudge against Hillary Clinton. Putin blamed the former Secretary of State for inciting mass protest in Russia against his government in 2011. Payback was information warfare that was multifaceted. It included Twitter campaigns, propaganda, and fake news, and the hacks of state and local electoral boards and the Democratic National Committee. Today's report was a declassified version of a longer report that was shared with President Obama and President-elect Trump. That classified document detailed intercepts of Russian officials congratulating each other on Donald Trump's victory. It also identified the Russian actors who gave stolen data from Democratic officials to WikiLeaks. Investigators point to the close relationship between WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and the Russian news network RT, which airs in the U.S. The report says a Russian media executive went to London in 2013 and met Assange in person. U.S. intelligence says RT and WikiLeaks have collaborated several times since. As Mr. Trump became the GOP nominee, the nature of the Russian activities changed.
There's nothing I can think of that I'd rather do than have Russia friendly as opposed to the way they are right now.
U.S. officials believe Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for him and then aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances. But the Kremlin still believed Clinton would win and had already put together a Twitter campaign with the hashtag #DemocracyRIP to discredit her victory. Late today, the Department of Homeland Security declared election systems to be critical infrastructure, which will give the agency greater oversight over their cybersecurity. But, Scott, no one believes the Russian attacks compromised the vote tally.
Jeff Pegues in the Washington newsroom. Jeff, thank you very much. Mr. Trump was briefed today by the directors of national intelligence, the FBI, the CIA, and the National Security Agency. Jan Crawford has that.
Calling the briefing with top intelligence officials constructive, Donald Trump acknowledged Russia, China, other countries, outside groups, and people are continuously trying to mount cyber attacks against the U.S. But he declined to say whether he accepted the intelligence community's conclusion that Vladimir Putin directed the attack. On Thursday, Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, who was among top officials briefing Mr. Trump, stopped short of saying the hacks had an impact on the election's outcome.
Certainly the intelligence community can't gauge the impact it had on choices the electorate made. There's no way for us to gauge that.
In his statement, Mr. Trump was adamant. There was absolutely no effect on the outcome of the election, including the fact that there was no tampering whatsoever with voting machines. The briefing came as Mr. Trump for weeks has cast doubt on the intelligence community.
They have no idea if it's Russia or China or somebody. It could be somebody sitting in a bed someplace.
Before the meeting, which lasted nearly 2 hours, he told the New York Times he believed the intense focus on the Russian cyber attacks was a political witch hunt by his opponents to undermine his presidency. They got beaten very badly in the election, Mr. Trump told the Times. They are very embarrassed about it. Vice President-elect Mike Pence was also in the meeting.
We're going to take aggressive action in the early days of our new administration to combat cyber attacks and protect the security of the American people.
Now, despite his public criticism, Mr. Trump also said today, Scott, that he has tremendous respect for the work and service done by the men and women of the intelligence community.
Jan Crawford for us tonight. Thank you very much. During the campaign, Mr. Trump also said that he would stop illegal immigration by forcing Mexico to pay for a wall. But today it appears Mr. Trump expects American taxpayers to pick up the tab first. Nancy Cordes has that.
We will build the wall 100%.
It was perhaps his most memorable campaign promise, uttered hundreds of times on the trail.
And who is going to pay for the wall? They may not know it yet, but the answer is Mexico.
But today, Mr. Trump appeared to acknowledge that Americans, not Mexicans, would likely write the check, claiming any money spent on building the Great Wall for sake of speed will be paid back by Mexico later. It's the latest campaign reversal for Mr. Trump, who has also backed off vows to ban Muslim immigration, create a deportation force,
Because you'd be in jail.
and prosecute Hillary Clinton.
I don't want to hurt them. They're good people. I don't want to hurt them.
The wall came up today because GOP lawmakers are looking at reviving a 2006 law that authorized but never funded a 700-mile border barrier. Cost estimates range from hundreds of millions to more than $1 billion. Indiana Republican Luke Messner.
Listen, it's big dollars, but if this is a priority for our country, then we should fund it.
On CBS This Morning, Trump's senior advisor, Kellyanne Conway, insisted there's been no flip-flop.
And if Congress is trying to find different ways to fund this project that is a top priority to President Trump, then they should do that.
It was never totally clear how Mr. Trump planned to force Mexico to pay for a wall it doesn't want. It's even less clear today, Scott, how he could compel Mexico to repay the United States after the wall is already built.
Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill. Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, Steve Hartman on the road. The West Coast is bracing for another wave of snow, ice, and rain. John Blackstone is in the Sierra Nevada tonight. John?
The deep snowpack here in the mountains this winter could go a long way towards solving California's long drought. But the whiteout conditions that have blanketed this 400-mile mountain range is also a disaster in the making. There's another extremely wet storm expected this weekend that will bring warm rains that could melt the snow too quickly, causing massive floods. That's what's worrying residents the most. Instead of bringing drought relief, Scott, all this snow may bring devastating floods.
John Blackstone, thanks. There's also severe weather ahead in the east. In upstate New York, blizzards that started Wednesday could dump 5 feet of snow. Storm warnings stretch from Louisiana to Cape Cod. North Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama have declared states of emergency because of the threat of snow, ice, and rain. Coming up next, Steve Hartman finds a saint in St. Louis.
The inauguration of America's 45th president, live on CBS.